Hey everyone, so today we're going to be discussing whether Pluto is a planet or not. This is a very controversial topic within discussions of the solar system today, and now we're going to dive into this topic a little more. So if I was to be presenting this to a class, next I would do a little Q&A with a class. So who, by a show of hands, thinks Pluto should be a planet? And I would raise your hand for yes, and I would count those hands. Raise your hands for no, and at this point, I would probably just take a few minutes and go over why people think it is a planet, why people think it isn't a planet before going into the facts about it. So this slide is a little bit of Pluto data, and if the class could turn to page 203, they can see this data on the top of the page. I'm not going to go through all this, but just a few basic facts. It's made up of ice and rock. It has 5 moons. Its radius is 1,187 kilometers. And prior to its removal as a planet, Pluto was kind of seen as a misfit out of the planets. Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars are called the rocky planets, and Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune are referred to as the gas giants. But from the beginning, Pluto didn't fall under any of these categories. It was neither a rocky planet or a gas giant. So in the movie, it is referred to somewhat of a scrawny planet. Its diameter is under 1,500 miles, and in the Pluto files, this is explained as merely the distance from California to Kansas, while having a smaller mass than the moon. So Pluto, from the get-go, people knew was a little different than the other planets. And this is a good visual just for the size. That shows us the size of Pluto compared to other objects in our solar system. The main spot I want you to focus on is the bottom left corner, where we get a good visual of Pluto compared to the moon and Earth. As you can see, this correlates to the data we learned about in the previous slide, this slide. And Pluto is visibly different than, the size is visibly different than the moon and the Earth, as we can see right here. So just a little history. The discovery of Pluto was originated with Percival Lowell, who was born in 1855 and died in 1916. And as we learned in the Pluto files, in 1894, Percival Lowell built an observatory in Arizona. Originally, he was studying and trying to find life on Mars, but then he noticed another planet getting in the way of Neptune's orbit. So he didn't really have an idea what this could be, didn't have a brilliant brilliant name for it. He referred to it as Planet X, which would be soon known as Pluto, but he never found it before he died. So on the left is just a basic shot of Percival Lowell, and on the right you can see him in his observatory studying the planets. So a little bit of the discovery of Pluto continued. In 1906, Clyde Tombaugh was born, and he lived until 1997. He was born in Streator, Illinois, and continued the hunt for Planet X after Lowell's death. Every few nights, Tombaugh would put a photosensitive plate on a telescope, and this telescope would slowly move with Earth's rotation, and while doing this, it would take pictures at various points of its movement. And Tombaugh would examine the pictures and look for subtle differences in them, and it took him a very long time to complete this process, but after a year he finally found what he'd been looking for, which was a tiny dot that would eventually become the 9th planet. So many people didn't know what to name this planet, and on March 14th, 1930, Venetia Burney came up with the name Pluto, who is seen on the left of this slide. Her grandfather wrote a letter to the Lowell Observatory and the name was approved. Originally, the name didn't go over well because Pluto was the name of a laxative, which you can see on the top right picture of this slide. But then Walt Disney created Pluto the pup, somewhat ironically around the same time Pluto was discovered, and this gave the planet attention it had never had. So as we continue on, we're going to get into more of the debate of this topic. So there are arguments pro Pluto as a planet, anti-Pluto as a planet. So according to the Pluto files, size is less important than shape when it comes to planets. So this is one of the arguments presented in the documentary The Pluto Files, is that size is less important than shape. And although Pluto is very small, this is not a reason why it shouldn't be a planet, according to one of the arguers in the Pluto Files. And as the documentary explains, it is round and it isn't potato shaped like many asteroids. And one author in an article that I researched as a little background for this presentation, an author named Philip Metzger, even talks about the size of animals. So the largest mammal is the blue whale and the smallest is the Etruscan shrew. The blue whale's mass is 101 million times greater than the Etruscan shrew, yet both are still classified as mammals. So many argue, why does the size of Pluto determine whether it should be a planet or not? If both the blue whale and this Etruscan shrew are both mammals, why does it make Pluto not a planet based on size? And also, Pluto has an atmosphere, which should also make it a planet, many argue. And with every pro, there is a opposing argument. So some of the opposing arguments include that Pluto is too small, and it also has a weird orbit. It crosses the orbit of Neptune, which no other planet does, and it has a highly elliptical orbit. And in 1992, David Jewett and Jane Liu discovered many more moving objects like Pluto in a region of the solar system called the Kuiper Belt, which was full of icy objects, and this led people to wonder if Pluto really is a planet or just another member of this belt, because then these two astronomers, David and Jane, began finding all these other objects in the belt, like Aries, which soon became classified as the 10th planet. So if just about everything in the Kuiper Belt's range is classified as a planet, what makes Pluto so special? So the International Astronomical Union decided that a planet must clear the neighborhood around its orbit. And technically, Pluto does not do this. So they came up with a new definition that Pluto is a new kind of planet. And does anyone know what this type of planet is called? This type of planet is classified as a dwarf planet, and a dwarf planet is defined as a celestial body resembling a small planet that lacks certain technical criteria that allow it to actually be called a planet. So now there are multiple dwarf planets in the solar system, and here is a great graphic showing that. There's Aries, Pluto, Haumea, Makemake, and Ceres. And what do you think? Should Pluto be a planet, or do you agree that it is a dwarf planet? It's time for you to decide. So, in conclusion, do you think Pluto, the definition should stand, the IAU definition, or do you think that Pluto should be, in fact, a planet? Thank you for listening to my presentation on Pluto.